Hello everybody, it's Miss Fincham, and we'll continue Unit 1 by covering the topic 4.6 Watersheds. Thank you to Jordan Smeeds for the slides and notes we use in class. Our objectives for today are to describe the characteristics of a watershed, including the area, length, slope, soil, vegetation types, and divides with adjoining watersheds. Our suggested science skill is to explain environmental concepts, processes, or models in applied context. A watershed is just a body of land that all drains into a central body of water. A body of water could be a river, a lake, or a stream. Watersheds are going to be determined by slope. What do I mean by that? You can think of a watershed as almost like a giant funnel of land that's all going to drain downward due to the force of gravity pulling runoff towards the central body of water. If we take a look at this diagram, if water were to fall just on the right side of this ridge, it's going to trickle down, and due to gravity, it will run off into this river. If it falls to the left of this dotted line here, it's going to follow the slope and go into a different watershed. Watershed boundaries are basically determined by slope. You can think of it as a drop of water lands on this piece of land. Which body of water will it run into? There are some other factors that are important to consider when we think about watersheds, and this would be soil composition, vegetation, and slope. This means that the more vegetation that a watershed has, basically the more infiltration we're going to have, and so rainwater will be slowed, it will be taken into the ground, and the roots will absorb some, but the plants will also make the ground a little bit more permeable and make it easier for the groundwater to infiltrate the ground rather than to run off. Then we have slope. The greater the slope, the faster the velocity of the runoff. Runoff that is coming off a slope will have a little bit more inertia to pick up soil or debris or any sort of sediments that are on the ground and carry them into this body of water. Finally, we have soil permeability. How permeable the soil is impacts whether or not water is running off or whether or not it is infiltrating and recharging groundwater. That would affect the rate at which water runs off of the watershed into the central body of water. It may also impact these sorts of pollutants that are gathering or the sediment that is washing into the specific body of water. The final thing we have to consider here is that human activities in a watershed directly determine the quality of water in that watershed. This is because actions like mining, agriculture, or clear cutting can produce pollutants or can loosen soil, which means that the runoff entering the body of water will carry those pollutants or carry those sediments into the body of water. Let's take a look at one of the largest watersheds in America, and that is the Chesapeake Bay watershed. This is a 6-state region where all of the bodies of water, the rivers, the streams, all eventually collect and empty into the Chesapeake Bay. Why does this matter? Why do we care about the Chesapeake Bay watershed? This is a great way to study the ecosystem services and the value that these habitats can provide. Remember that an estuary such as the Chesapeake Bay is a mixture of salt and freshwater. A lot of nutrients and a lot of sediments from all of these tributaries are collecting and emptying into estuary habitats here in the bay, such as the salt marsh. As you can see in the lower right-hand corner, we have a picture of one of those salt marshes. You can see the grasses and kind of the low meandering water line. It's a really productive habitat, and because it's so productive, it offers a lot of ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are things that have monetary benefits to humans. Tourism is one where people are going to come and stay in hotels and pay to go on tours here and just spend their time hiking and enjoying the natural beauty. There's a lot of water filtration too, though, so we don't have to filter as many pollutants out of our water because estuary habitats and wetlands are really effective at trapping pollutants in their roots and recharging groundwater with more clean water than if they weren't there. We also have habitats, so there are all sorts of animals here, such as crabs and other shellfish, that can be harvested from these habitats, and they are the breeding ground for them. Without them, we wouldn't enjoy nearly as much seafood, and a lot of people would not have jobs in restaurants, would lose revenue. Finally, we have stormwater protection. Stormwater protection can basically act as a kind of an overflow or a surge protection in the event of a large storm. Next, we'll take a look at some of the human impacts on the Chesapeake Bay ecosystem. The first one is nutrient pollution. Nutrient pollution refers to excess nitrogen and phosphorus entering a body of water, leading to something called eutrophication. Eutrophication is when we have an algae bloom due to all of these excess nutrients entering the body of water. Remember that nitrogen and phosphorus are often limiting nutrients, so when we add an excess of them, it leads to the explosion of algae growth. We can see here in the picture we have this algae blooming because of all of these nutrient inputs. The problem is that this will block the sunlight, and the plants underneath the surface will not be getting the sunlight they need to photosynthesize, causing them to die, and the bacteria in the water will start to break them down. Since decomposition is an aerobic process, in this case it uses up oxygen, those bacteria will take up a lot of the oxygen that other organisms in the water need to survive. That leads to those organisms dying. This gives us basically a positive feedback loop, where more and more oxygen gets consumed, so more and more organisms die. Now we see this as a positive feedback loop because one thing happens and it causes more of something else to happen, even though organisms dying is not a positive thing that we want happening in an environment. But it's still a positive feedback loop because we have something that's occurring and it's causing more of something to occur, whereas a negative feedback loop is we have something happening and it causes less of something else to happen. So when we have this oxygen being consumed and more oxygen's dying, it can lead to something called hypoxia, which is really low oxygen levels, and they can get so low that it's effectively a dead zone, meaning that we really don't have much life able to be supported by this body of water anymore. What are the sources of these nutrient inputs into bodies of water? Well, one would be the discharge of water from sewage treatment plants. We can see here in a picture that all of our wastewater, so water that we flush down the toilet, wash down the sink, empties out of our washing machines and our dishwashers, ends up at the water treatment plant. There are several steps in these water treatment plants designed to remove all the nutrients from our wastewater, but it's impossible to get that down to zero. So there's going to be some inputs of nutrients, especially if these plants overflow. Now that's not ideal, but sometimes in really heavy rain situations, these facilities do flood. And they do release raw sewage directly into a body of water. Then you have, of course, really elevated nutrient levels entering the body of water. Agriculture is going to be another source here. We can see the runoff from CAFOs, or concentrated animal feeding operations. All of the manure lagoons that contain the waste of animals, those are going to, of course, have a lot of nutrients in them, both nitrogen and phosphorus. We can also just get the synthetic nitrate fertilizers running off of agricultural fields. And so between wastewater treatment and agriculture, those are going to be the main drivers of nutrients entering bodies of water. There are some other pollutants we should consider, and those would be endocrine disruptors. Remember that endocrine disruptors can be medications that just pass through the bodies of people and go to the wastewater treatment plant and aren't quite fully removed. We could also have sediment pollution. Things such as clear cutting, urbanization, or farming, those are all going to lead to sediments being more loose and more easily carried into the river. Here's a picture that can demonstrate how dramatic this effect can be. You can see from an aerial image just how different the water's color is, and that it is going to decrease rates of photosynthesis. It is also going to make the water warmer because it has a lower albedo, or rate of reflection, and it is going to absorb more sunlight. We can also see that it's going to potentially cover up the rocky stream bottom that many organisms need in order to survive. This is a great example of a stream bottom here that is not impacted by sediment pollution. You can see how there are all these little crevices underneath these rocks where tiny crustaceans or other macroinvertebrates will live. But with a lot of sediment pollution, those habitats can basically be covered over by all of these sediments coming in. Clear cutting also affects watersheds. The first one is soil erosion. When trees and shrubs are clear cut off a piece of land, the roots that hold the soil in place are weakened or destroyed, allowing the stabilizing effect of those roots to be removed from the landscape. This leads to the loss of soil organic matter and nutrients found in the topsoil, which is easily blown away by the wind or washed away by the rain without the roots to hold it in place. We can see this in the picture here where the wind and rain are carving these channels into the side of the slip and washing away the topsoil. This also results in sediments being deposited into nearby streams, which increases the turbidity of the water, which is a measure of the total suspended particles in a water source. This makes it cloudier and harder for animals to get oxygen from the water and plants to get sunlight underwater. We can see in this diagram that when trees are present along the banks of the stream, they catch a lot of the sediment being eroded from the hillside above. Without them in the clear-cut diagram to the right, the runoff carries sediment right into the stream. The loss of the shade provided by the trees also allows more sunlight to reach the soil and the stream, which increases the temperature of both the soil and the water. The effective increase in solation is intensified by the fact that the soil has a lower albedo than the leaves of trees, and darker muddy stream water absorbs more sunlight than clearer stream water. The sediments themselves also bring heat into the water, raising its temperature, which can be harmful to species like fish that need higher oxygen levels in the water, as increased temperature decreases the amount of dissolved oxygen in the water. Finally, we have an increase in the occurrence of flooding, landslides, or mudslides. Logging machinery compacts the soil and increased sunlight dries it out, and these facts combined with the loss of root structure and organic matter in the topsoil decreases the soil's ability to hold water. When it rains, the soil holds less water and produces more runoff, which can flood nearby areas. It can even cause landslides, which destroys animal habitats and human structures, as we see pictured here. Let's look at some solutions to these pollutants entering bodies of water. If we take a look at location C and at A in this diagram, these are two methods that can be used to reduce nutrient inputs from agriculture. Cover crops are a great strategy. A cover crop is going to be basically using some plant in between the main crops that you're harvesting just to kind of hold the soil in place and anchor it. The cover crop keeps those sediments and the fertilizer in your field from running off into bodies of water. You can see if you're continually planting a cover crop each season is just going to do a phenomenal job of preventing runoff from entering these bodies of water and letting you trap the runoff. This allows the runoff to infiltrate back into the soil, uses up some of those excess nitrates, and is really an effective solution. Another solution you can try is to adopt better animal manure management practices. This could involve a manure lagoon that's lined better, that has higher banks or berms to kind of contain the manure. There could be a system that even drains it more frequently and turns it into fertilizer pellets. If we look at location B, another really good generalized strategy is riparian buffers. Riparian habitats or riparian areas refer to the areas alongside a body of water such as a river. When you plant vegetation in riparian habitats, what you're doing is adding in basically a giant sponge or a giant filter so that the runoff entering the body of water has gone through all of this vegetation. First, the roots are going to absorb a lot of the water depending on what kind of plants you use, and the roots may be really effective at even trapping pollutants in their root structures and then metabolizing them or just preventing them from making it into that body of water. So riparian buffers are a really valuable strategy for reducing these pollutants entering bodies of water. If we look at location D and F, These are both going to target human sewage. We can utilize septic tank upgrades to prevent pollution by human sewage. A septic tank is where you just have a tank in your backyard that collects your waste. And depending on how we optimize the drain field to more slowly drain the sewage out, it can allow that to be filtered more naturally by the ground and prevent it from overflowing and contaminating nearby surface waters. Then we can also have biological waste removal, which uses microbes that are going to be eating a lot of the waste and trying to utilize a lot of those nutrients to prevent those from being released into the river. And so just a ton of different options for trying to reduce nutrient and sediment inputs into the body of water. Our practice FRQ for 4.6 targets the science skill of explaining environmental concepts, processes, or models in applied contexts. Today's FRQ asks how deforestation affects water quality. Identify one change that can occur in the water quality of streams within a watershed that has been affected by deforestation and explain how deforestation led to this change. When you have finished your notes, don't forget to take a picture or scan them using your Chromebook and upload them into Canvas.